Testing. Can you hear me? Hello, my name is Stephen Higgs. I work for Syncro, the company who makes the Oxygen XML suite of products. And my presentation today is probably going to be a little bit different from what you're used to. You probably usually don't hear from the technical writer's perspective. And many of you are very similar to the highly intelligent, very technically inclined developers that I collaborate with when I create our documentation. And of course, I'm the idiot who takes their amazing ideas and butchers them by simplifying them into non-technical words. But anyway, one of the possible themes for presentations for this conference this year was XML success stories. And as the creators of Oxygen, I'd like to think that our company has a lot of success stories. But George and some of the others that you may know were talking about some of our recent successful endeavors. And they asked me to offer a presentation on how we managed to improve our internal collaboration process. So my agenda, I have but one purpose, and that's to present an actual real-world use case, a real story, where we at Oxygen found dynamic solutions for our various internal collaboration challenges. And our intended results were to improve the efficiency for the documentation process, to increase the productivity for all of our teams, and higher quality of documentation. So our story began some time ago when we were analyzing our documentation process, and we were trying to find areas that could be improved. And one area that we found really needed to be addressed was the collaboration part of the process. And of course, every company has their own way of collaborating, their own set of challenges, their own organizational structure, workflow. The collaborators usually have their own way of thinking and communicating. Sometimes they have access to different applications or different levels of writing skills. It often requires documents to be sent back and forth numerous times. And in some cases, a lot of companies have personnel that are scattered amongst multiple locations or work different work schedules. And these were some of the challenges that we also faced. So we had three main areas that we wanted to focus on. Those were, number one, the proofreading phase. Number two, collaboration between our documentation team and support team. And three, collaboration during the content creation phase. So the first area is the proofreading phase within our issue tracking process. We use Jira for our issue tracking and project management. And we had already gone through to great lengths to streamline the workflow in Jira. We configured it so that, for example, every type of issue has a logical flow. And we eliminated unnecessary fields. We added automatic notifications so every team is notified when an issue reaches a stage where they need to act. We integrated our repositories. So developers will use the Jira issue when they commit to their Subversion repository. The documentation team uses the Jira issue when they commit to their Git repository. And then the commit information is displayed directly in Jira. It looks like this. And even though we had streamlined our workflow in Jira, we found that when it reached the point where documentation had been added or changed and it needed to be proofread, we really needed to address that process because we had some inefficiencies. So for context, this is what our documentation workflow looks like. It usually starts with a Jira issue, and then it progresses through multiple creation stages and eventually reaches the proofreading stage. And at this point, the quality assurance team or a developer or both will proofread the change or addition in the documentation. So these were the challenges that we found for this scenario. We found that when it reached this stage, the methods that were used were inconsistent. There were a lot of unnecessary steps required, and the proofreaders usually didn't have access to the documentation team's project and couldn't add feedback directly in the source document. So we found that some of them just looked at the diff of the change, and in the JIRA issue, if the proofreader clicked on a file in the commit information, it would open a diff comparison in GitHub. It looks like this, and you can see that it's not very helpful. It's just a fragment. They don't see the whole context. We also found that others would wait for the documentation to be processed in our nightly build process on our test server, and then they would look at the output from the test server. And in this case, they would be able to see the whole context, but they would have to find the topic, and then if there was something that needed to be changed or they needed to offer feedback, they would still need to communicate with the documentation team, who would need to make a manual change. Some of our developers actually do have access to the current documentation project, so they could open the topic in Oxygen and make changes, but it was very tedious. We found that they would have to switch to another application and pull the changes from the repository, then find the topic, open it in Oxygen, make the changes, go back and commit the changes, notify the documentation team, and so on. So it was a very tedious process. And the proofreading is a small part of their job. Of course, the developer's main focus is to improve the product. The quality assurance team's main focus is to test the product. So we found that if we don't give them a very easy way to access the source document, they're more likely to rush through it and the feedback might not be as effective. So our solution goals for this scenario. We wanted to provide an easily accessible online review tool, and we wanted to make the source document accessible directly from JIRA. So we already had an existing online visual editor in Oxygen XML WebAuthor, and we already had a mechanism to integrate it with our Git repository. So we just needed to pull it all together. So what we did is we implemented what we call a WebAuthor review bot, and anytime the documentation team uses the JIRA issue number in a commit, this review bot will insert a link to that particular source document, and the proofreader just has to click on that link, and it'll open the actual source document in WebAuthor. They will see the actual XML structure and the whole context of the document. They can make changes, add comments. All they need to do at that point is commit their changes, and the documentation team can easily pull those changes back into the project. Now, most of the time, the proofreaders just have to make a small correction or add a comment, and WebAuthor is perfect for that. It was based on similar technology as the desktop version of Oxygen XML Editor, so it has a lot of the same functionality, but we primarily use it as a review tool. And the key is that it's accessible from exactly the places where we need it to be, and it's from a browser, and that's the key, making it very easy for the proofreaders. So by providing a seamless integration between JIRA, WebAuthor, and our Git repositories, we've managed to make our whole process much more efficient and simple. We've eliminated a lot of steps, and we've encouraged better feedback. So the next area we wanted to focus on is a scenario where our support team identifies problems in the published output. This is usually encountered when they happen to notice a problem while working with an end user. And in some cases, our end users will notice a problem in the published output, and they'll notify our support team. So in this scenario, again, the support team usually just needs to make a very small correction. But the challenges that we identified were also very similar to the first scenario. So the support team, when they offered feedback to the documentation team, we found that their methods were often inconsistent, there were unnecessary steps, and they didn't have access to the documentation team's project and couldn't add feedback directly in the source document. So we found that usually lots of messages had to be sent back and forth, and in some cases it was not exactly clear exactly where the change needed to be made in the documentation. So our solution goals in this scenario were also very similar to the first one. We needed to provide an easily accessible online review tool. We have WebAuthor, and in this case we needed to make the documents accessible from the published output. So what we did in this case is in our online web help and PDF output, in each topic we have an edit link. And if the support person finds a problem in this topic, they just have to click that edit link. And again, it'll open the actual source document in WebAuthor. They'll see the XML structure, the whole context. Again, they can make changes, add comments. They just need to commit the changes, and the documentation team can easily pull the changes back. So not only have we managed to eliminate several steps in the process, but because their comment or change is precisely at the location of the problem, it helps ensure accuracy as well. The next area that we needed to focus on is probably where we had the biggest challenge, and that is collaboration during the content creation phase. And what we're talking about here is the collaboration that takes place with the documentation team as they're creating documents with subject matter experts. So, for example, a technical writer will create documentation and they need to send documents to a developer. Perhaps they have questions, or maybe it's a very technical document, so they need to have them review it to make sure that they worded everything properly. Some cases, maybe they need the developer to add content, like an example of code or something of that nature. So in this scenario, our workflow looks something like this. Suppose a developer implements a new feature. In Jira, they'll add notes indicating that a documentation change or addition needs to happen. The technical writer will gather the information, communicate with the developer. They'll create the content, send documents for review to the developer. The developer will gather their feedback and send it back to the technical writer, who will adjust the documentation. And these steps may be repeated numerous times until both parties are happy with the final results. After the documentation is finalized and committed, then it reaches the proofreading phase. So in this scenario, our challenges were these. We found that most of the subject matter experts didn't have access to the current documentation project. So documents had to be sent back and forth numerous times, and even if they did have access, it was very tedious. Sending fragments often led to confusion since the subject matter experts couldn't see the whole context, again leading to more steps required. If the documents aren't easy to access, the subject matter expert was less likely to offer good feedback. Again, they're very busy and this isn't their primary focus. And in some cases, the subject matter expert was in a different location or worked different hours than the technical writer. So this slows down the process. So to address these challenges, we really needed a comprehensive and dynamic solution. So we decided to develop our own new collaboration tool, and we integrated it with our existing products. And every step along the way, we really focused on trying to make it a comprehensive solution for these challenges, as well as even some smaller challenges. So our solution goals were, one, to provide an efficient way for documents to be passed back and forth, regardless of where the contributor is located. to provide an easily accessible tool, to provide an easy way for them to communicate, to make the process incremental, and notify the documentation team when it progresses to a new stage, and provide a way to automatically merge the changes back into the documentation team's project. So let me show you what we did. The first thing we needed to do was find an efficient way to share documents. So we created a new product called Oxygen Content Fusion. And in the desktop version of Oxygen XML Editor or Author, Content Fusion contributes this task manager view. And as a technical writer, I can add documents to a new task. We use DITA for our documentation, so I can select a context DITA map. This is the root map, and this is so that keys and references are resolved properly. I can give it a name and upload the task with the attached documents to the Content Fusion server. And you see that I've already created numerous tasks. And if I click on one of the task name, it'll open the task details in my default browser. And I'm showing you this in a slide because I'm going to show you the reviewer's perspective, and I didn't want to bore you watching me sign out and sign back in with different credentials. But behind the scenes, it generates a link for every task, and I just need to share that link with anybody that I want to review the documents. And the reviewer uses that link to open the task details in their browser. And you see that it's very similar. The interface is almost identical. They have, some of the options are a little bit different, and they see who created the task. So it's a very efficient way of sharing documents. The next thing, we needed an online visual tool. And again, we have WebAuthor, so we just needed to integrate it into Content Fusion. So the reviewer just needs to click on the file, and again, it opens it in WebAuthor. You see the context, the XML structure. You can add comments, make changes, and we enforce the change tracking feature to always be enabled, and this way the technical writer always sees exactly what was changed. And from a technical writer's perspective, another tremendous advantage of the document being in a state where the XML structure is already there is I don't have to worry about the reviewers introducing new styles or elements that I don't want used. I have my own style rules, writing rules, and set of DITA elements that are allowed. And I've gone to great lengths to analyze the output to see how each DITA element is rendered in our various output formats. And we've configured our CSS style sheets accordingly. So I don't want new elements that haven't been analyzed or that don't work in one of our formats introduced. But as I said, we use WebAuthor as a review tool. And so most of the time, the contributors are just going to add comments or make changes in the text content. But even if they do happen to change the XML structure, I will always see exactly what was changed. And I also use schematron rules to impose these style rules that I have. And so when I automatically merge the changes back into my project, then the schematron rules will pick them up at that point as well. So the next thing we wanted to do was implement an efficient way to communicate. So what we did is we implemented a messaging mechanism directly in the interface. Over on the left, the reviewer can add a message. Anyone that has access to this task will see the message and can add their own. And we designed it to have a very familiar look and feel. And so it's something that they're used to. They're more likely to use it and hence offer better feedback. The next thing is that we wanted to make the process incremental so that it progressed through a logical flow. If more than one reviewer is assigned to a task, we didn't want there to be conflicts. So we implemented a file locking mechanism so that only one reviewer can work on the same file at once. And of course, our documentation team works concurrently on the same project, but we did not want this to be the case in the review process. So once a reviewer is done with their review process, or if they remain idle for too long, then that file lock will release, and then another reviewer can start working on that file. And you see that I've remained idle for too long, so I'm now in read-only mode. So anyone that has access to this task could start working on it. And if nobody has, I can click Continue Editing to lock the file again. And to bring it all back together full circle, oh wait, one more thing. We wanted to notify the technical writer of any changes in the process. So when it progressed to a new stage, they needed to be notified. So the task creator is notified anytime a reviewer first accesses a task, anytime a message is added, anytime a file is changed, or anytime the review process is finalized. And we configured it so we receive those notifications via email, but you also see the notifications in the task manager view in Oxygen. So the technical writer, if they're working in Oxygen, they don't need to exit, they see the notifications here. So the final thing is we wanted to bring it back full circle and provide a way to automatically merge the changes back into Oxygen. We didn't want the reviewers to have to save and commit the changes. We wanted it to be a very automatic process and avoid conflicts. And for this, we used our existing file comparison tool. So if I click Get Changes, it opens our file comparison tool, and we enhanced it so that it effectively looks for any changes between the original file, any changes made by the reviewers, and any change made by the technical writer in that same document after they originally uploaded it. And we also added a visual mode, as you see, and so the technical writer sees the comparison in the same mode that they're used to working with. And usually I just need to click Apply, and it applies the changes directly in the document, and I see everything that was done because we forced the change tracking feature to always been enabled. So by creating our new product, Content Fusion, and integrating it with our existing products, we managed to solve all of the challenges that we faced for our collaboration process, and we made the process very efficient and simple. We eliminated a lot of steps. And through all of this process, everything that we attempted here, these were our final results. So the whole collaboration process is more efficient. The methods are more consistent. We've managed to increase productivity for all teams involved, and so it's easier to meet deadlines. The reviewers offer better feedback, and the documentation is higher quality and more accurate. So I've reached the end of my storytelling today. That's not the end of our story. Of course, we always continue to improve our processes and products. But thank you very much for listening.
And 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Okay, no microphone. 1 2. It's off.
1 2 3.
1 2. Okay, I speak louder then. That's fine. So, oh, perfect. It's working now. A few minutes for questions. I think there was a lot of exchange on Twitter, so maybe we have time for 1 or up to 3 questions. Yeah, you will not go faster to the coffee break if you don't ask questions. I think you get it, right?
Hey, I'm all for a quick
No, I have one
coffee
question.
break.
What would be the missing piece that you foresee right now? I see that it looks more and more like, I would say, the W word, like Microsoft Word.
One thing that I find would be interesting, I mentioned that I have schematron rules that impose my writing rules and whatnot. It'd be interesting if we could somehow attach those rules with the documents that get sent back so that they also have those imposed rules when they're when they're adding their comments or making changes to the documents. I don't know if that's possible, but.
Maybe I have one question. And what if one contribution to the document is a new schematron rule too? Not changing the content, but adding some rule together. For the moment, the contribution is comments, modification to the content. But what if it would be new rules together?
Well, you can make any change to that document. You can even switch to an XML source editing mode. Oops, let me. Well, not in Content Fusion. In WebAuthor, you can do that. There's a source editing mode, but so in Content Fusion, it's more of a lightweight version of WebAuthor, and it's just meant as a review tool, as I said.
Okay. Michael.
You've talked a lot about the collaboration within your community, within the company of producing documentation. Where does the contributions of users come into it? How do they interact with the content? And,
The end users?
The end users, the users of the product.
Like I said, in most cases, they contact our support team if they have an issue, and sometimes they find problems in the documentation. And so the support team can then make quick corrections by going straight to WebAuthor. In our online web help version, we also have a feedback-enabled system, so end users can add comments directly there. And again, our support team sees those comments every morning, and if it's something that needs to be addressed in the documentation, they'll either point it out to us or make the correction themselves.
So you don't want to move more towards a kind of wiki approach where users' comments are visible to each other?
I think this definitely could be used for something like that. It would be great. It's a matter of, I don't know that we want to do that for our documentation because it's very precise about a software product. But I could definitely see it being used as some sort of wiki, right, George?
Sorry. So even now, anyone can use that edit action to suggest changes to our documentation. Because the repository will be forked in their account, and they can send a pull request. So they can suggest changes directly to the documentation. So it works in a way like a wiki.
But our internal support team actually is in the process of creating a wiki, so I could see us using Content Fusion for all of our team contributing to that as well.
Yeah. Jim.
Jim Fuller, Mark Logic. I probably missed it, but does this work with Git, not just GitHub? I thought any Git repo?
Yeah, we use a Git repository. We just happen to use GitHub for I guess, the visual part of it. And I personally use SourceTree for our documentation project, but it can be used with other clients too, right?
Okay, thank you very much. So it looks like XML people need coffee to be efficient in conference. That's what I learned from Twitter. So the coffee break is open, so you will have coffee upstairs